This lovely style of earring is very similar to sort of Indian jewellery or much more sort of bohemian jewellery. And I had a lovely lady on a workshop called Susan who created a pair of similar style earrings and wanted a tutorial that would remind her of how to create this design again and again. And you can see it can be done in a more intermediate way with some weaving at the base. There's so many variations on this theme, and you can even simplify it much more with a different frame and then just using stalks on the beads rather than doing the rosary linking system, which is how the dangle works. So let's get started. I'm going to be making a framework first, that teardrop frame, and I'm using 0.8 of a millimeter, 20 gauge silver wire, and really the shape or the scale, I suppose, or the size of your teardrop is dependent on what mandrel you're going to wrap it around and how big you want it. So I'm using this particular size mandrel for the size earring that I want. And all you do, as you can see, is just wrap it around to get that lovely sort of circular base, and then bring the two ends together. And obviously, if you're making earrings, cut the two frameworks at the same time so that they are equal size. Now, for the cut ends, you could use, to make the links, you can use step pliers like I've got, small step pliers, because that ensures that the links on the top of the frames are equal size, but otherwise use your round nose pliers to make these top links. And you can see I'm curling the wire at 90 degrees to the framework so that those circles sit facing each other, and that way they will come and sit at the top of the frame. They'll sit together, and you can just feed a jump ring through the two to suspend it. So there's your framework. Now this framework is a little bit soft because it's 0.8 mil. I'm going to put it on my steel block, get the steel planishing hammer of the whammer, and I'm going to stroke that gently. Especially, I'm putting more emphasis on the arched rounded end of the frame, and you can see I'm holding the top ends together so that it doesn't distort and open up, and that just gives it a bit of solidity, really, sort of, so that the framework is strong. So there's your frame. Now we're going to concentrate on the rosary linking, the beads that are, so I'm using 0.4 millimeter very thin binding wire, and I'm only using this thin wire because I'm using very small beads that are small drilled, and so it's going to be very delicate exercise. If your beads are bigger, you can use 0.6 millimeter wire. So the way to do this linking system is to go a little bit down the wire, make a loop. The wire is going to cross over, the end of the wire is going to cross over, and you just push that wire just at the base of the circle to create that loop. So the wire is crossed over, holding that circle in place. And now I'm going to change hands, only because I'm right-handed, and then hold it in that hand, hold it still, and then with my chain nose pliers, I'm just tiny little movements. I'm going to pull the wire and bind it on the stem. And I'm going to try and keep it so that it's not bunched over itself, but it winds down close, neat, and next to each other. And if you have too much wire, just trim it off like I have. And the ends must be sort of pinched down. So next you thread your chosen bead on, hold it right up to that little bit of binding, bend the wire back to a right angle. So you've got a little gap between the bead. So there's a gap between the bead. And now pick up the wire, wrap it round to your round nose pliers or your step pliers, and make another loop. And you've got this gap now that you can wind the rest of the wire in that gap right up to the bead, and that creates the rat loops or links on either side of the bead. So there we have it. And you really have to do that because the wire is so fine that if you just made a link, it could loosen and open up. So how to make the chain of rosary links: you make another link on for the next bead. You've just seen how to do that. You make a circle, you wrap the end just underneath the circle, keeping it in your pliers, straighten out that stem to toughen it a little bit, and then wrap the excess wire just underneath as neat as you can. This time I've got enough wire not to have to cut it off, so I'm using it all. And when that's been wrapped, push the bead right up to that wrap. And now bend to create a gap, pick it up just after that bend, make the loop, and then cut it off the spool, leaving enough little extension wire that you can use for wrapping. And this is how you connect them. So you push the wrap loop bead into that gap, hold the circle with one pair of pliers, and then wrap the extended wire into that gap to seal those two links together and get this rosary linking effect. So you just wrap it until it touches the bead. If you've got too much, as I said, snip it off, and then you'll have to neaten the ends. So this type of technique is, it really does require a lot of concentration. I wouldn't do this if I was in a rush. I'd do it slowly, and it's repetitive. It's rather fun. So for the end bead, all I'm doing for that one is pushing the end of the wire over the side of the bead, just one side of the bead, until it comes and hits the other side where the wire stem is protruding. And then I'm taking the end and wrapping it just there to secure it. So this is the very last bead. I don't want a link at the end of this one. I just want a suspension link for linking it onto my chain. So there it is. It's sealed there. I'm just making sure the end is neat. So there it is. It's sealed within the wire. Can't come out. And then I'm going to make a little gap, create the loop above the gap, cut it off from the spool, leaving a little bit for wrapping, push that into the last bead on my chain so that it sits in the last link of the other bead. Then I'm going to hold the circle to keep it flat, change hands, and then do my wrap with the extended wire. So just wrap until it comes and sits at the top of the bead. And so you can make all these little dangly beaded chains, whatever you want to hang from your earring. You can also use this technique to make beautiful bracelets, necklaces, chain link systems. it really is for small beads and excellent for semi-precious little beads like this. So that requires quite a lot of patience, so I'm just finishing off. I don't want you to have to watch me doing all of the beads because I think you'd fall asleep. So I'm just speeding on so that you can see how I link everything onto the frame. So this is the last bead here on this particular chain, my dangly chain. Finishing that off, making sure that's neat. So take your time, practice this maybe with slightly chunkier beads, and then line up all your dangles in the order that you want to suspend them off. And next you're going to be making some small jump rings. So this is 0.8 millimeter. I'm making a coil the way we make a jump ring coil. If you have jump rings to hand, obviously you don't have to do this, but I'm making everything by hand. So I'm going to cut through, create jump rings that will be linked to the top of my little beaded chains so that they can be suspended on the teardrop frame. So we're going to open those each, turn them sideways, link them into the tops and close up. Make sure they're completely sealed. What you can do, I'm doing this maybe, you know, you don't have to do it in the order I'm doing it, but you can, as you're doing this, you can actually link them on to your framework and seal them on the base of that teardrop frame. The reason I'm not doing that now is I want to show you how I bind them onto the frame. And if I put them all on, you won't be able to see that. So basically, you want to get them all with their links on the top, and then you're going to use 0.4 of a millimeter. Cut a nice long sort of piece, something like 10 inches. Allow enough for your binding. So I'm going to link my longest chain, the central chain. I always start at the center of a frame when I'm binding things on, and that way I can make sure I don't bind it in a lopsided way. I put the center one on and work out on each side. So I've linked it onto my framework. It's dangling from there. And now I'm finding the center of my binding wire, and I'm going to place the central part of the binding wire onto the frame. So I've got enough to bind on each side. And then I'm going to wrap it tightly on the frame. So on the base of the frame, I'm wrapping it to secure it. Then I'm going to find the center and bring the wire over that jump ring that's suspended, keeping it in the center of my framework. So it's going over that one, not too tightly, but so that it can still dangle, and then coming on the opposite side, and then I'm binding it tightly again on the framework. And the reason I'm going to do probably about six binds is to create a gap before I put on my next dangle. So you see there's about 6 binds there to create that gap. But you can do however many gaps you want. If you want your dangles to be closer together, then do less gaps. So then you put on the next suspended bead dangle. But what I would say to you is the way I really do it when I'm not videoing it is I put all my dangles on first, because I find that to have the binding wire and everything there is far harder to do, and I just sort of hold it at an angle and get the other dangles out of the way while I'm binding. So you'll have to find your own way of doing this, because it gets very fiddly with all these things sort of trying to get in the way of your fingers. But the essence of it is that you're suspending all the dangles from the base, and then you're binding 6 times between each of your looped dangles to create a gap and also to secure them on in place where you want them. And then with the end of the wire, you just wrap it until you've got a nice sort of like bit of binding around the edge. Make sure there's no spiky end, and then you go to the opposite side and do exactly the same, creating the gaps. So I'm now putting the other side of my centerpiece. So I'm just going to, and because you've got a gap at the top of your framework, you can bring the wire through that gap. And always, I've got a bit of a glitch. So if that happens, if you've got a bit of a glitch and it's gone over itself, you still have a chance to undo it and then continue. So here we go. I'm just binding it, and then I'm scooching it up. Make sure it's really nice and neat, because you're going to see all the workings. And then carrying on between the next loop. So I'm always going round that top jump ring that's suspended, and then binding tightly to the sides on each of these dangles. And now I'm nearly there. So I've got to the last dangle coming up, push that in place where I want it, and then finish off the last bit of binding on the side of my frame. And really that's it. It's laborious, but it's very meditative and mindful and enjoyable in that sense. So there we've got a frame of little dangles. You could stop there and leave that as your earring, but I'm going to do a little centerpiece that you can do. So I'm using 0.8mm wire, working from the spool. I'm creating a little spiral. So this is going to create a center bit of interest, but you could equally just hang a bead in the center. And I'm going to make a wiggle with my round nose pliers, sort of a bit of a snaky wiggle, cut it off, leaving a stem. As I say, you could hang one central bead down the middle, and the reason I'm doing this is to show you, if you've only got these small beads to hand, this is how you can use them. So I've just hammered my framework so that the structure of it, sorry, I'm out of view now, so I'll come back in view. I just needed to turn it round. So I'm just hammering the edges of that wiggle so it's a bit firmer and tempered. So now I'm cutting some 0.4, the binding wire, and I'm going to bind it above the top wiggle and bring it down through the center of that wiggle and take one of my little beads that I've used, and that is going to sit in that wiggle. So it'll sort of just have a nice little sort of space in there. It's held in that bit of wire. And then I wire that on below the bead, come round to put another bead on in, and that will sit in the second wiggle that I've made just above the spiral, and then finish that off, cut off any excess, neaten all the wires down. So that just gives you a little decorative middle center that matches the beads without you having to find a centerpiece bead to dangle in the middle. I mean, you don't have to put anything in the middle. So now we're placing this centerpiece at the center of the teardrop frame. So you've got to work out where to cut it at the top. It's got to sit inside that center, and then you just need to leave enough to make a link at the top so that it's suspended within the frame. So I've done that, and I'm making a centralized loop. So make sure it's sort of centered to the beaded decoration that's going down the middle, that loop. And then you're going to get a larger jump ring. So if you create a larger jump ring, or if you have one to hand, open that up and then feed it through one side of your frame, through that center dangle, and then through to the opposite side of the frame and close it up. And there you have the dangle at the center of your framework. That's how you can suspend anything from the frame. And that's the earring done. And all you have to do now is the ear wires. So I'm taking 0.8, equally you can take 0.9. Sterling silver is probably great for ear wires. And then I'm bending that in half. It's just, I would say it's just under 2 inches of wire, you know, 1.5 inches or so, doubled. So I've doubled that wire, about 3 inches in all. And I'm just going to straighten the doubled wires out with my hammer. I just make sure it's running, they're running parallel and they're straight. And you can do that with your nylon head. If you just stroke it across your steel block, you'll find that will straighten and not change. Now I'm using the steel head just to sort of stroke that end, that doubled end. So once you've got them nice and parallel, I'm taking some bail making pliers to make the ear wires. So first of all, I start with a small loop. You can use your round nose pliers for that. And then I'm going to make the bigger loop of the ear hook. Any mandrel will do. It doesn't have to be bail making pliers, it just makes it easier to hold. So you're making a big hook. I'm going to trim off however long I want the ear wires to be. And then I'm going to bend them with a little kick up so that they have, at the ends, they go into a little hook. And now I'm cutting. I've opened up the first small loop. I cut them so that they separate. So you've got 2 identical ear wires. Close that loop again where I cut it and separated the 2 wires. And you're ready just to toughen them a bit. So go to your steel block, and with the steel end of your hammer, first of all, you might have to flatten them with the nylon, but just concentrate on hammering that rounded end. You don't want to do too much hammering, so I'm using my nylon end for the ear wire bit that goes through the ear. And then we can link that on to finish off the earring, and it's got the ear wire there. So I hope you've enjoyed watching the project, and you can create your own beautiful boho earrings in this fashion. Thank you so much for watching, and do subscribe to help me grow my channel. Many thanks.